Hello, my name is Jordy Izzard, and I am Senior Associate Director of SAIS Alumni Relations, and I have the pleasure today of being here with Marilyn Meyers, who graduated from SAIS in 1966, having spent her first year, she graduated with her master's degree in 1966, having spent her first year here in Washington, D.C., and her second year in Bologna, Italy. And yesterday was here to celebrate her 50th anniversary from having graduated from SAIS at the Legacy Circle Luncheon. And today's date is April 14th, 2016, and it's so great to have you, and we're just going to have a little bit of a conversation.
Great.
And why don't we start with what originally brought you to SAIS?
All right, well, thank you, Jordy. I appreciate your having asked me to come along and share a few memories and observations. I think the first thing that brought me to SAIS was that I knew when I finished undergraduate school, when I graduated, and I went to school in Memphis, Tennessee, that I wanted to go into international studies. I had spent my junior year in France and discovered that there was a whole world out there. It wasn't all Memphis, and even though it was shortly after Elvis, etc., etc. And I knew I wanted to come to Washington because this is where the center of government and international relations is located. And so what I was going to do was to go to whichever graduate school gave me more money. So it was either going to be SAIS or it was going to be Georgetown School of Foreign Service, are the two I was looking at. And then fortunately for me, I got a Woodrow Wilson Fellowship, which I could use at either place. And so I decided that I would come to SAIS.
What was the turning point? I'm just curious for you.
Well, I think the turning point in why I chose SAIS.
Yeah, the choice.
I think the reason was that I talked to some of my professors at what was then Southwestern at Memphis, and all schools go through up and down phases. I mean, they're in the ascendant, they're and SAIS's reputation was really coming along at that time.
Oh, that's great.
People were excited about it, and so I thought, well, let me try SAIS.
Well, lucky us. And
well, lucky me too.
Well, tell us actually, in thinking back on those 2 years between 64 and 66, and being in two totally different locations, tell us what some of your memories were of being at SAIS on both those campuses.
Well, I came here first, as you noted, did the first year in Washington, and I think the biggest shock, and I think many new graduate students go through this, was that when I left my own college, I was very close to the top of my class. Phi Beta Kappa, all this sort of stuff, and all of a sudden you arrive at graduate school and you are one among equals. I mean, everybody else is just as smart, if not smarter, etc., more accomplished. So you have to find yourself all over again. But I found two roommates. We shared a one-bedroom apartment over here on Rhode Island Avenue, close to 14th Street, which was not at all, shall we say, gentrified in those days. You had to make sure you walked home with someone if you walked home at night. This whole area north of Massachusetts Avenue was fairly rough. But I remember my fellow students. I remember hanging out in a much less spectacular dining hall at 1740. And I guess the major event that took place internationally or government-wise while the year I was here was the election of 1964, the presidential election, Johnson versus Goldwater. And then was going to the inaugural ball for Lyndon Johnson, and with a couple of other students, we managed to, shall we say, parlay our way into a couple of invitations to the ball that actually took place at the Armory, the D.C. Armory, for a very reasonable cost. I think it was $50 a couple in those days. So one of my fellow students said, "Yeah, right, let's go. You pay your 25, I'll pay my 25." But I remember the bands at that evening at that place. Guy Lombardo is still around. Somebody from the 40s and 50s might remember him. And Louis Armstrong was the other. So it was quite a spectacular night with the president and, of course, Vice President Humphrey and their wives there. So that was really quite a memory of that year here in Washington.
Terrific. And then what about Bologna?
Bologna was going back to Europe, which is what I had really wanted to do based on the year in France. And I enjoyed it very much. I think I particularly enjoyed and would enjoy even more now the fact that it was not really a tourist city. Now, you didn't have that many tourists internationally going to Florence or Rome or any place yet. But Bologna was very much Italian. Again, shared an apartment with several other girl students. That's the way it was done in those days, which was okay. And just had a wonderful time, again, in terms of meeting many of the other students who, of course, were from European universities. So there were some of us here from the States, but many, one of my roommates, for example, was from Austria. There was a German girl, a French girl right across the hall. So it was the shared experience of not only having the class time together, but being able to live with people who had come from other countries. So that was a very valuable experience. And of course, a lot of travel that took place on weekends and some of our official trips as well. So it was another great year, and I was more in love than ever with Europe. So
very different than the first year.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Terrific.
Yeah.
And then in 1966, you graduated from SAIS. And tell us about how your career started, and then tell us about the trajectory of it.
Well, I knew I was interested primarily in the Foreign Service, in the State Department, and one of my professors my senior year at Southwestern had told me about it. My father was in small business. I'd never heard about the Foreign Service. So I had taken the exam. Actually, I took it while I was a senior at Southwestern, did not pass the oral, and then I took it again in Florence, at the consulate in Florence, the spring of '66. And then came back to do the orals here in Washington. But having not passed the oral the first time, I was fairly wary. It was still a very difficult time for women to get into the Foreign Service as officers. Now, they certainly needed secretaries and so on, but so I had some other prospects lined up as well based on professors' contacts. I had interviews on the Hill, interviews at a couple other government departments. And it did take me a year to work things through, but in the fall of '67 I did get sworn into the Foreign Service, and my parents were able to come all the way from Minnesota at that point, and relatives from New Jersey, and it was quite an affair on the 8th floor of the State Department.
Wow, that's terrific. And where did you go?
Well, I did not go to Europe. I was angling for anything from, shall we say, Stockholm south to, Palermo, perhaps. I went to Sydney, Australia, and I think part of the reason is that I had passed my French requirement. French had been my foreign language at SAIS, and because I came in and passed the language requirement, the department did not have to try to get me over a hurdle of language within a year or two, so therefore I was not sent to a French-speaking post where I would presumably learn more French. So I went to Sydney where, as you're aware, there's very little French spoken, mainly Australian, which can be quite different from American English. And any French I had, I used to have lunch with the Belgian Consul General about once every 3 months, and we talked for 30 minutes in French, and then we go into English. So it was Sydney in consular affairs to begin with.
And then from there, how long were you there? Like 3 or 4 years?
Initially, for young officers, it's usually a 2-year assignment because they want to rotate you through, at least at that point in time, and I think things may be somewhat the same still, rotate you through different types of work so you can see where you really fit in best. So it was just 2 years, and then it was back here to do a 6-month economic course at what was then called the Foreign Service Institute. And then after that I was assigned to the department to North African Affairs and working on economic issues concerning the countries in North Africa.
So we're talking about like Morocco and...
Morocco east to Libya. It was shortly after, within 2 or 3 years since Colonel Gaddafi had taken over in Libya, kicked out King Idris. So we had a very talented group of officers, country officers, each one working on a different place. I helped out across the, with all the economic things for all the countries, but then shortly thereafter was given my own desk, which brought together Sudan and Mauritania, opposite ends of the North African chain, shall we say.
And now that brings us, and was this all in Washington that you were?
This was in Washington.
Okay, and so how long were you, now what year are we?
We're up to 70 to 72, and then so again it was a 2-year assignment, and then I was due to rotate out, probably going to Africa, and I ended up actually going to South Africa, to Johannesburg. So that was in the summer of 72.
And then were you there for another 2 years? What were you doing?
I was there for 2 years doing economic commercial work in the consulate in Joburg, which was kind of, well, we weren't actively promoting trade with South Africa. I mean, it was certainly the era where apartheid was still very, very strong, way before the Sullivan Principles and so on came down, were formulated. But if someone came in, and American businessmen, and wanted help in marketing a product, we were certainly, willing to help them out and so on. But we didn't go out. We didn't have any trade shows or trade fairs or anything, promotions going on as you do in most other countries. So that again was a 2-year assignment. And during that trip, or doing that assignment, I took a break over Christmas one year and went to the Far East on my own ticket, vacation. Because one of our officers in Johannesburg had served in Hong Kong and said how the Far East was changing, on the surface at least, very quickly. I had never, when I was in Australia, I never managed to travel out of Australia. I mean, there's so much to see there as well. So I went to the Far East, and I went to several countries in that 3 weeks, and I was completely struck and smitten by Japan when I got there.
Excellent. Yeah, keep going. Tell me more.
Well, because here I was working on economic commercial matters, and I walked into this powerhouse. This is, along about 73, 74, a country that was really starting to give us a run for our money when it came to trade and products and things that they were exporting into this market, and the difficulty of selling it in their market. And so that was very alive and vital and exciting. And the other thing was just the culture. I had never been in a place that was so different and yet so beautiful in so many ways, be it the country itself, be it the kabuki, the ikebana, the culture in general. And I even learned to like raw fish in 10 short days. So I thought, I've got to get back there if I can. And when I went back to my desk in Johannesburg, there was something on the desk, lots of stuff, waiting for me to come back. But a request for volunteers for hard language training beginning the following summer in Washington in various languages, and one of the languages on the list was Japanese.
Oh, wow.
Yep. Bingo.
So now it's 75 summer.
74.
74 summer, and you're learning
back.
Japanese.
Yep, and I started language training in August, September of 74.
Okay.
Back here in Washington.
Okay. And
that was a year, and then an onward assignment to somewhere in Japan. I was hoping to go to an embassy because I'd worked in 2 consulates, which was fine, but so I was sent to the economics section in Tokyo, which was terrific.
How long were you in Tokyo?
That time 3 years. It was to be 2, but I extended it. And I was, my portfolio had to do with all the transportation-related issues, such as civil aviation, air routes, who flies where, what size aircraft, et cetera, trying to open up more landing rights for U.S. Planes in Japan, and vice versa for the Japanese coming into our market.
So were you in Tokyo then?
I was in Tokyo.
You were,
yeah,
and that was 75 to 78?
75 to 78, I came back here, assigned to the Japan desk in Washington, where I continued to work on economic issues. And that was a couple of years, and during that time, as I left Japan in 78, I knew I wanted to finish the language training, to do the 2nd year, and to go back. And I thought, you can work this out, you're going to be working still on Japan, and fortunately it did work out, so I went back to language school again in Japan, in Yokohama, in 1980, and I had a year there, full-time, your tax dollars at work, small classes, two people in a class. I mean, you can't run and you can't hide. I mean, if there are only 2 people with your Japanese teacher, but excellent training. And then I was sent to be the consul in southern Japan, which was good because that meant that I went out into the country, and once you left the office in Fukuoka, you had to speak Japanese because you were not in Tokyo where you have 40,000 foreigners living there.
Sure.
So that was a great experience.
And you were there for how long then?
That again was a 2-year assignment.
Okay.
So we're up to about 83 now.
Terrific. And then did you come back to Washington?
I came back to Washington. I came back to the National War College for a year.
Teaching or going to school?
No, as a student.
Okay.
And it was a wonderful opportunity because, well, what they do, I mean, most of the students there are military officers of 05, 06 rank from the various services. And then you have a smattering of civilian types from Treasury, from CIA, from state, etc., who are also there. But it gives us, civilian types, a chance to be in classes every day with the military to get some perspective of how they approach things, and in the same way, some of the area studies, for example, there, it gives the military a chance. But the idea is also building a network and relationships that perhaps in the future, in an embassy, you're going to be working together, and on the same country team, you will have perhaps the Air Force attaché, who's someone that, my goodness, you went to school with at the War College in 1984, 85, something like that. So,
wow.
83, 84.
Okay, and now it's 1984, and what happened?
And then I got a necessary promotion, and I went back to Tokyo as the economic counselor.
Wow, terrific.
Yeah, I was delighted.
And that was in Tokyo?
I was in Tokyo.
And you were there for 3 years?
And that time I was there for 3 years. Yeah.
Okay.
And I worked for the same ambassador who was still there, who arrived in let me get this straight, 1977, Ambassador Mike Mansfield, former Senate Majority Leader, who had been appointed by Carter, but then kept by Reagan the whole time that Reagan was there. So I come back and well, Marilyn, you're back with us again, all right? What's the view from Washington? Well, certainly. Anyhow, so I had the privilege of working with him again, which was just terrific.
Terrific.
What a wonderful man.
Yeah, and then now where are we now?
So we're in the economic section in Tokyo Embassy, and I'm the economic counselor with about 5 officers who work for me in that section. The commercial section had been separated off in the meantime. I mean, Commerce Department has its own foreign service, as you know. That had all come through. So it was economic officers and several of the Japanese staff that worked for me. And then there was an economic minister who was the economic minister for commercial and economic affairs over me. But
and then it's 1988.
1987 I came back.
You come back. And
Yep.
you're back in Washington again.
Back in Washington,
Okay.
in the Economic Bureau,
Okay.
Director of the Office of Investment Policy, which is private investment overseas and the policies that govern it. It was
Wow, interesting.
the era of talks in Geneva. This is before WTO, of course, still under the GATT agreement, and it was basically something called the Uruguay round, discussions that had started in Uruguay, and the idea was to try to do away with trade barriers, not just tariffs and so on, which pretty much had been lowered over the years, but some of the other things that would affect investment flows, the decision that a private corporation would make whether to go in or out of a market and actually build facilities there. So my little part of that was to try to work on getting governments to bring down special incentives that they offer to attract someone to come in. And so that was what was going on in Geneva, somewhat in Paris, because OECD was working on the same. So that was a couple of years. And then also with other countries, so-called lesser developed countries, as they were called at that time. I'm not sure what the politically correct term is now.
Developing countries?
Developing countries, we were working on something called bilateral investment treaties to try to encourage, in a way, provide the safeguards that would encourage U.S. companies to go into, say, certain countries in Latin America and invest, or certain countries in Africa and invest. So the office I was in was responsible for helping negotiate those as well. Terrific. So that got me to Latin America on a couple of business trips.
Oh wow, that's and how's your Spanish?
My Spanish is zilch. My Japanese is still pretty good.
Yeah, that's
and
terrific.
my French is not too bad.
Okay, and then where were we? What year are we now?
So we were there. I was supposed to be 3 years. So it was supposed to be
through 91.
87. It was supposed to be 87 to. Have I got that right? Yeah, 90.
Mm-hmm.
But then I got a call from the East Asia Bureau in state, and they wanted me to come back to them as one of the deputy assistant secretaries.
In Japan.
No, in Washington.
Oh, I see.
In the bureau here.
Oh, terrific.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. It was Bill Clark called me. He was the principal to ask. So that was in '89. Well, I had told my boss in EB that I would be there 3 years, which is what he wanted. So I went in one Saturday morning with great trepidation, because he was thought to be, and certainly gave every appearance of being quite a curmudgeon, and I thought, boy, Bill isn't going to like this, you know.
Uh-huh.
So I sort of, crept into his office and said, I needed to talk to you. He said, yeah, come in and sit down. And so I said, all right, here goes, and just said, well, I had this call from Ambassador Clark, and they want me to come. And he was so excited for me. He said, this is terrific. I mean, the Bureau wants you to come back to them. Of course, this is the greatest thing. Wow, of course you're going to go do it. And I said, of course I'm going to go do it. So,
Right.
But I was absolutely thrilled. But he was a wonderful boss, and as demonstrated by the fact that if this was good for me, it was fine with him.
That's great.
He said, don't worry, we can find somebody
Yeah.
who can take your place. I said, okay, So I went back to EAP,
Okay.
East Asia Pacific, as one of the deputy assistant secretaries from about '89 to '91.
Amazing. Yeah.
And I had South Pacific, which was Australia, New Zealand,
Uh-huh.
Papua New Guinea, and the various Pacific Island states, and the trust territory of the Pacific, the states that came out of that, the not the Marianas, the Marshalls, the Federated States of Micronesia. And Palau was still hanging in as a trust territory, and then the Marianas, of course, which is a commonwealth. So, two of the four trust territories had become independent states, got their membership in the UN, were voted into the UN in about the winter of, must have been '90, Christmas of '90 or
interesting.
so.
Yeah. And now it's 1991, and where do you go from
And
there?
'91, I went back to Australia as the minister, the number 2 in the embassy.
Mm-hmm. So it's called the minister there. It's not the deputy chief of mission.
Well, deputy chief of mission is an internal term
Uh-huh.
for ranks in the embassy.
I see.
And minister is the diplomatic title
I
for
see.
what you are.
So it's one and the same.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
different.
It's
outward
different
yeah.
ways of referring to
I
the
see.
same job.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're a DCM to us, and you're considered, your card would say Minister, U.S. Embassy,
Okay, terrific.
Canberra. So I was the number 2.
Okay. And that was for 3 years? Till 1994?
It was going to be for 3 years, and the ambassador changed. The ambassador was a political appointee, as they usually have been for Australia. Now that's changed in the last 20 years or so. We've had career officers get that post as well. But in any event, the ambassador left. It was the Bush 1 appointee who left in early '93. Clinton administration came in, and I had, as in all embassies, you have a rogues gallery. The photographs, you've probably seen them, of the former ambassadors. So I went out, and it has their dates of service. And so I thought, all right, let's take a look at what how long is it going to be till somebody comes in and takes my chargé title away, because I was going to run the show. And it looked like it was about 3 or 4 months, and I thought, fine. And so I did the travel, I did the speeches and all this stuff. It took longer. It took about 8 months until the new ambassador came. And I got very spoiled in that time. I mean, I liked being in charge and having my country team. I mean, tremendous group of officers working together. Some of the military types, not this, nobody that I had met at the War College, but the same idea. So in a sense, I thought, I want to walk into something like this. Well, that meant you have to get an ambassadorial title, which is not easy to come by. And I was getting ready to move the next year, and there was nothing coming up career-wise that I could hope for. The White House, of course, grabs a certain percentage of ambassadorships for itself. It always has, it always will, anywhere from 25 to 33 1/3%, whatever. And some of my, people, my contacts back in personnel said there's nothing coming up that, you could hope for. It's just not there. And I needed that to stay in because it was a very narrow window for promotion otherwise. Anyway, to make a long story shorter, one of the places that was open and I was able to go, and because they do not have, or did not have, we did not have an ambassador there at the time, the charge ran the place, was Rangoon, Burma.
Huh.
So I got the position of charge in Rangoon, so I went there in the fall of '94.
Oh, terrific. And then were you there for
I was there a
3
couple of
years?
years.
Okay.
A couple of years, yeah.
Okay.
And then it was time to look outside the department because my time in class was running out. I was a minister counselor, which is not bad at all.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in the senior service, 2 ranks up in there. But there were only about 2 or 3 of us getting through the gate every year. That's how tight the promotions were.
Mm-hmm.
And I had met some people at the World Health Organization when I was working in Japan, and also in Geneva there when I'd gone on some of the trade talks. But in any event, there was a position coming open in Japan with WHO.
Oh, terrific.
And I was encouraged to try for it, and I thought, and people back here in States said, go for it, And anything that would take me back to Japan, I was also excited about. So I made the move. I retired, and then I went back to Japan, to Kobe, in end of '96.
On your 4th trip there, your 4th stay.
At least. I'm glad you're keeping count. I've sort of lost.
Yeah.
People say, well, how long did you live in Japan? And I said, well, if you put it all together, probably about 11 or 12 years.
Yeah.
So I went back to Kobe, and that was a 2-year contract with WHO, and
Uh-huh.
that was great because I lived in Kobe, which was an area I'd not spent a lot of time in
Uh-huh.
before. It was shortly after they had had their terrible earthquake in '95, January '95, where they lost about 3,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
So it was the year after that. So the city was still, pulling itself together in many ways, which is one of the reasons that they wanted the UN to come in with one of its agencies, and so it was the city and the prefecture and also Kobe Steel who basically funded, told WHO, if you will set up a research center for global health issues here in Kobe, we will help fund that for at least 10 years. And so that was all worked out.
Mm-hmm.
Again, to my advantage, so I was able to go as the #2 in the research center there.
Terrific.
Yeah, and lived out on the economy and I mean, always I'd been under the embassy's wing when it came to living in a place.
Sure.
If something doesn't work, you call the admin officer. The higher you go in the embassy, the quicker they come over to fix whatever it is the problem you've got. I remember living in this apartment in Kobe, and I had my lovely Japanese appliances, but everything was in Japanese. I mean, the instruction book and so on. My heavens, trying to do a load of wash the first time, and I had to call one of my staff members to come out to the house and help me.
Sure.
And so she did, got it started, ran fine, but
That's great.
anyway, so it was wonderful, and I got to travel more in Japan, which I...
Good. And is that where you officially retired, was with that position?
Yeah. I was out of state, and I was with the UN with WHO, so I had a laissez-passer, was my travel document.
And then when you came back to
and when
the
I
US,
came back, I was really retired.
Officially retired.
Yeah, I had to go back through Geneva to sign out.
Uh-huh.
And then I just picked up on some of my other interests, one of which I already started to cultivate while I was here, when I was a DAS, and that was being a docent at the Washington National Cathedral.
Oh.
So I picked up on that. When I was still working full-time, I would give them like a Saturday twice a month, but now I could give 1 day a week during the week,
Sure.
whichever day they needed somebody. So I got back into that, and I'm still doing that now.
Good.
Greatly enjoy it.
Good. Terrific.
Yeah, and I travel as much as I can overseas. Still.
Amazing.
So,
yeah.
Going to Italy next week for the 50th reunion of the Bologna
Terrific.
class, yeah.
And now, looking back on your illustrious career, wow, you have certainly done a lot. What advice might you have for a current SAIS student today?
Well, it's really it's hard to say in some ways because the world has changed so much from the world that it was 50 years ago. And John McLaughlin certainly brought this out yesterday during his speech at the Legacy Circle lunch. But then it was the Cold War, and so it was basically the two great powers. Now you have just this scattering of everything everywhere. So that makes it a lot harder. I think the thing that is encouraging in his way, there's so many more opportunities for women in all sorts of fields dealing with international affairs.
Mm-hmm.
Be it financial or be it business or be it government, state, all these things, the opportunities that are there that weren't there 50 years ago. So I think that's very encouraging. But I think what I'd have to say is find what you think your passion is, what you think you're interested in, and go for it. And then if something comes along that distracts you, like in my case in a way, it was Japan.
Mm-hmm.
I never considered Japan. I happened to go there on that trip. I never actually served in a post in Europe, despite having spent a year in France, despite having spent a year of study in Italy. And I don't regret that because I think I actually saw more action in terms of the issues I was involved in,
Mm-hmm.
certainly in Tokyo, and certainly in Rangoon, which was a completely different experience. So I'd say start out with what you think you're interested in and go for it. But if something else comes across that you sort of look at and then the next day you're still sort of looking over your shoulder at it, then don't be afraid to shift.
Mm-hmm.
And do that stuff early on because life's just going to get more complicated when you get married and then you have family to think about and the spouse's career. Now that never happened to me because when I came in, if I got married, I had to resign. I mean, women were out, and that didn't change until the early mid-'70s was when that changed.
Mm-hmm.
So, but still, that adds a complicating factor because, of course, you've got a bit of competition there for who's going to do what and when.
Sure.
So it's going to be very interesting, and do what you think you want to, but don't be afraid to be distracted by other things that do not turn out to be red herrings. They really turn out to be something good.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. Congratulations on your 50 years and on your wonderful career. And
okay.
Thanks for all you do to help SAIS and the world.
Oh, you're welcome.